The next item worth discussing is H1 tags or header tags. So if you look at this page right here, the top of the page has a header tag. I'm sure you've seen pages that have this before, but you actually have to look deep into the source code to actually see if this is coded properly, because you want to have what is called an H1 tag. So if I right click, go to inspect element on Google Chrome and look at this code right here, you can see that it is in fact an H1 tag. It's got H1, it's got the text right there, and actually you don't need this break, but then it has a closing H1. That is how to write an H1 tag. Now, just because it looks like a header, an H1 tag, doesn't mean it is. This could easily be styled using something called CSS and not have the H1. But if you want to get maximum SEO benefit, you want to have your main headline be an H1 tag. That's because Google and other search engines, they look to see what your H1 is, and they will give extra brownie points to the words you're using in this particular H1. So if you want to rank for how to set goals, having it included in the H1 tag will give you a little bit of bonus points in the potential for ranking for that term. So if I look at the source code, it's included there. Now, how do we create the H1? Like I said, I showed you the actual HTML code, but if you use something like WordPress, more times than not, if you type it into this main section here, that will be the H1 tag for your page. So not only will it automatically kind of make this the title tag, which we talked about before, but it'll also make it the H1 on the page. So here's a WordPress website where, and I'll just go to the edit page section just so you can see. So I typed in neurofeedback up here, and it automatically displayed right here. And if I'm looking at the source code again, inspect element, you can see that it is in fact the H1 tag on the page. Now with WordPress, like I said, most templates are set up to where whatever you put in here is automatically going to be the H1 tag. But if you're using a different content management system, you'll have to look to see where you go to create an H1. And if it doesn't, for some reason, if it's just straight HTML that you have to type in, then that's pretty simple again. So let's pretend that I'm not using WordPress and I'm just given this blob of text to use. I would just do H1 like this, then type in my headline, whatever it is, and then close with this right here, H1. So that's how it's done. Some CMSs also, let me just delete this right here. A lot of CMSs, you don't necessarily have to type all the HTML yourself. You can type your headline, select it, and then choose from a drop-down. So heading 1. So let's see that. It looks the same. So I've made this my heading, my H1, and I have to look at the source code again. You can see that it automatically did it. H1 here, although it added a bunch of code wrapped around it, which is what I don't want. That's why if I'm doing coding, this is a side note, I like to do it from text because I have an HTML knowledge. But you can see that this is actually not the way you want it coded. You want this image to be outside of your heading. So you'd want it something like this. And as you can see, it still looks the same, but that's a side note. So some CMSs, you can actually use a drop-down to select where you want the H1. That's actually a pretty common feature in most content management systems. But if you're using WordPress, again, let me just delete that. if you're using WordPress, more times than not, it's included up here. Now, again, you want to have an H1 on all of your pages for two reasons. One, for user experience, and two, for search engines. Like I already covered the search engine benefits. They give a little bit more weight, Google and other search engines, if your H1 includes the keyword you want to rank for. So this page wants to rank for neurofeedback. Because they're using it in their H1, they're going to have a better chance of ranking for that term. But you also want to have a headline for users as well, right? Every page on your website, you have a good opportunity to catch their attention with a really good headline. And I'm not going to cover in this video, but having catchy headlines is super important because you want people staying on your website and reading your pages. So there's the user element as well, having a good headline that stands out. Now, if you already have your website set up, you can use Screaming Frog again to look and see what your H1s are on your website. So I can go down this list and see what the H1s are for my page or for my website. And as I said before, a good rule of thumb, every page on your website should have an H1 tag. Now, another rule, your website should only have one H1 tag. So every page has one H1, but only one. So because I have an H1 tag here, I wouldn't want to go down here and have another H1 tag here or here. And if you actually look at the code on these, you can see that they're H2 tags, which is perfectly fine. And I'll go over that in another video. But you do not want to have a page that has multiple H1s. And if you're using WordPress, it's pretty hard to screw this up because the H1's included here. So unless you purposely go into your text field and type in H1 and make a headline, you're only going to have one H1. The other rule that is worth noting is you want to have a unique H1 tag for every page on your website. So if I go back to Screaming Frog, you can see that these pages right here all have business directory as an H1 tag, which is not what you want. You want to have unique headlines for each one of these. So if I actually look at these pages, you can see it says business directory, business directory, business directory. That is not what you want to have. Ideally, for this particular page, you can see that the event right here is probably what you want the H1 tag to be. So this is what you would want to wrap as an H1 tag instead of business directory. So let's just look and see what they actually have this wrapped up as. Okay, so this is an example of where they screwed up and had multiple H1 tags on the page. So it's good that they have this set up to be an H1 tag, but they also have business directory set up as an H1. So this is where you could use some advanced styling and not make this an H1. Instead, just make it just a basic paragraph text with some styling. So it looks like this, but isn't an H1. So it can be pretty easy to screw this up and have multiple H1s, but you don't want to have this because, again, if you have multiple H1s on a page, then Google's going to see that it's going to devalue it. So it's going to see business directory and give you a little bit of credit, but then it's going to give you a little bit of credit here, and it just muddies the SEO benefit compared to if I would have just had one H1 on the page and it would have been this. So I would have got full credit for all the keywords and phrasing that I've used on this particular page. So I just wanted to give an overview of H1s. Again, you want to have a unique H1 on every page on your website. You want to try to squeeze in whatever keywords you're targeting on the page. But really, most importantly, you want to have an H1 on every page because of the user benefit. You want it to really stand out, be a catchy headline, so people will be encouraged to read the rest of the content on your website. So if you want to be an SEO professional and do the absolute best SEO on your website possible, make sure you include an H1 on all of your pages, make them unique, and make them stand out for the best user experience possible.